Loads of locations all around the world that match this description. But nonetheless, this account and that landscape are really remarkably similar.
This dramatic landscape draws thousands of tourists every year. But not all of them realise that they are actually sailing into the remnants of an enormous volcanic crater.
Everywhere you look on this island, there's geological evidence of volcanic activity. 1,000 years before Plato was writing, in around about 1620 BC, this island suffered the biggest volcanic eruption in the whole of the ancient world.
And, you know, you go out on deck and, wow, you realise, wow, I'm up in the ship.
One of the world's leading volcanologists, Haraldur Sigurdsson, recently led an expedition to the sea floor around Santorini. He found surprising evidence of the true scale of the Theran eruption.
We use two approaches. So basically you're firing a gun that sends a sound wave into the sea floor and you get data coming back that tells you the thickness of the layers. But then the other method we used was to send down a submersible, which is like a small car, but you drive it from the ship. It's got 9 cameras on it, all taking video, and you get all sorts of information.
Haraldur's team scanned the sea floor, measuring underwater deposits produced by the volcano.
We know that the eruption produced mostly pyroclastic flows. When an eruption of this type begins, it immediately creates a plume of ash and pumice that goes up into the atmosphere. Then, after a few hours, you have a collapse of the eruption column cascading down like avalanches. The pyroclastic flows begin. Pyroclastic flows have a very distinctive rock type, composed of pumice and ash and big stones all mixed together. If the eruption really had had a big impact, we would expect to find pyroclastic flows on the sea floor. What we found is that the deposit extends on the sea floor 30 kilometers in all directions from the Santorini volcano. So it's very, very widespread.
These findings show that the eruption was one of the greatest ever in the human experience.
In the previous studies, we had estimated that there were about 30 cubic kilometers erupted from this event, which is a very large volume. But with these new findings, we found that actually the deposit is about 60 cubic kilometers, or maybe even more. Let's compare it to some other eruptions, and one convenient one is the very famous eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD in Italy, which destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum. We know that the Vesuvius eruption was about 6 kilometers only, compared to 60 here. Another very famous eruption is the eruption of Mount St. Helens in the United States in 1980.
Like smoke coming out of a chimney.
But it was only half a cubic kilometer compared to 60 here. So this is a very, very special event.
Do you think there's a possibility that in Plato's Atlantis myth, what he's also remembering is this event here?
Personally, I have no doubt that the Atlantis myth was triggered by the eruption of Santorini. We're getting so much geological evidence that supports a major natural catastrophe in this area that I think we have to look at it very carefully as the nucleus for this myth.
Plato's Atlantis was an island. It was destroyed by a disaster, and it was home to an advanced civilization. Thera matches all 3 of these characteristics. Firstly, its topography is remarkably similar to Plato's Atlantis. Secondly, it was the scene of a natural disaster of cataclysmic proportions. And crucially, it was also home to an amazing civilization. The eruption rendered the island uninhabitable for centuries, but as the landscape came back to life, people returned. Then, in 1967, archaeologists made an incredible discovery. Beneath more than 100 feet of pumice and ash was a lost world, entombed by the eruption. It was heralded as the Pompeii of the Aegean.
But to my mind, even that phrase doesn't do this site justice. So far, archaeologists have excavated 10,000 square metres of the town, but they actually estimate that it is 30 times bigger than that. This is a buried city that is slowly being brought back to life. In my opinion, Theran Bronze Age society is one of the most beguiling of all civilizations that ever walked the earth. And you've got to remember that we're talking about people who are living and working 3,500 years ago. Kalimera.
The Greek authorities are reluctant to allow outsiders to film the ongoing restoration process.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. That is all for me.
But Chief Archaeologist Christos Doumas has granted us special permission to go behind the scenes. This treasure trove of artefacts provides a glimpse of the sophisticated world that the Therans once inhabited.
We have the evidence that they were very sophisticated in inventing things. Especially with pottery, they managed to solve a lot of their everyday problems. They managed to produce very sophisticated shapes and forms, and in very high quality. These are very rare and unique.
The Akrotiri storage rooms also house a series of spectacular wall paintings. As each one is painstakingly pieced together, it becomes increasingly clear just how advanced this society was.
The wall paintings that have been discovered at Thera are in a league of their own. They're very vivacious, they're very unsuppressed, they're very individualistic. Compare that with the other art of the period, the beautiful art of Egypt, for example, and there you're looking at something which is much more monumental, much more formulaic, much more controlled. Whereas the Theran wall paintings have their own life and their own story. One of the things that you notice immediately about the wall paintings is that women are conspicuous not by their absence, but by their presence. In almost all of the figurative pictures, you'll find a woman there. And what's really interesting is that they are clearly of high status. Look at this beautiful girl. She's got exquisite gold hoop earrings, and her bodice has been coloured with that expensive saffron dye. She's actually offering saffron to this kind of superwoman, who I suspect is some kind of divinity, because she's got behind her a griffin, which was usually a sign of a goddess or a spirit. The contrast between these women from the Bronze Age and the women of Plato's day in 5th century Athens could not be starker. In Athens, women were second-class citizens. They were often not allowed out during daylight, they were only given half rations, and they were encouraged not to speak out in public. Whereas these girls from 1,000 years earlier, from the Bronze Age, they have respect, they have clout, and they clearly have standing in society.
So for me, Theia in society is in more ways than one a lost world.